"No authorization, no entry," she barked voice, slicing through the blaring sirens like a knife. There she stood, Karen Delmont, self-proclaimed queen of Willow Creek Estates, blocking the front gate with her shiny silver SUV. The ambulance lights reflected off her oversized sunglasses as she crossed her arms, utterly unmoved by the paramedics begging her to move. I was halfway down my driveway, still in my medic uniform, when I realized what was happening. The ambulance wasn't for a random resident, it was for someone inside our neighborhood, someone fighting for her life. And the only thing standing between her and help was Karen and her ridiculous rulebook. The paramedic shouted, "Ma'am, this is an emergency," Karen just sneered. "Rules are rules. No vehicle enters without HOA clearance." That's when I saw the girl inside the ambulance, and my heart dropped. Because the patient wasn't just anyone. She was the mayor's daughter. Before we get deeper into this wild story, tell me where you're watching from, and don't forget to subscribe for more HOA madness. When I first moved into Willow Creek Estates, I thought I'd found peace. After 20 years on the job as a paramedic in the city, sirens, chaos, and endless night shifts, I wanted nothing more than quiet mornings, coffee on the porch, and maybe the sound of sprinklers instead of car crashes. The brochures called it a community built on order and pride. That should have been my first red flag. Because order and pride in Willow Creek meant one thing: Karen Delmont. Karen wasn't just the HOA president, she was the self-appointed sheriff, judge, and executioner of the neighborhood. A woman in her early 50s with hair sprayed to near armor, she drove her silver SUV like a tank patrolling the streets. Every morning, she'd cruise slowly past the house's window, cracked clipboard in hand, ready to strike at the faintest sign of noncompliance. In the first month alone, I received 3 violation letters. One for leaving my garbage bin out for more than 45 minutes past the designated pickup window. Another for having unauthorized emergency signage on my garage translation, my red medic response decal. And a third one, my favorite, for displaying a non-standard flag. It was the American flag. When I called to clarify that the flag was in fact the flag of the country we lived in, Karen told me in her calm, condescending tone, "It's not about patriotism, Mr. Bennett. It's about uniform aesthetics. Uniform aesthetics. In other words, no individuality allowed." My next-door neighbor, old Mr. Peters, once told me, "Around here, you either obey Karen or she makes your life miserable." I laughed at first, but over time I saw the pattern. She fined the elderly couple across the street for having too many flower pots on their porch. She wrote up a single mom for her improperly parked bicycle. She even measured someone's grass with a ruler. But the real trouble started with my ambulance. I kept my old emergency van parked in my driveway, a fully functional ambulance I'd bought after retiring. I used it for volunteer work, free medical outreach for rural areas outside town. I wasn't charging anyone, wasn't running a business. But to Karen, it was a commercial vehicle. One morning, I woke up to a bright orange sticker slapped across my windshield: "Notice of HOA violation. Commercial equipment storage prohibited." I walked over to Karen's SUV as she sat idling near the gate, sipping from a mug that said Queen of the HOA. I remember her smirk as she rolled down the window. "Good morning, Mr. Bennett," she said, all fake sweetness. "I hope you saw the notice. It's nothing personal, of course, but we must enforce the bylaws consistently." "Karen," I said, struggling to stay polite, "that's an ambulance. I'm a licensed paramedic. It's for emergencies, not business." She gave a small laugh, the kind that told you she wasn't listening. "Rules are rules, dear. Maybe you can store it somewhere else, like where the hospital." She didn't even blink. "That's not my concern." From that day on, she seemed to make me her personal project. She'd slow her SUV in front of my house taking photos. She'd email reminders about proper driveway cleanliness. Once she even complained to the HOA board that my porch light was too bright and disruptive to neighborhood harmony. I started keeping a folder, screenshots, letters, timestamps. Not out of spite, but because after 20 years in emergency services, I knew that when people with too much power start playing games, documentation is your best defense. Still, I tried to stay civil. I ignored her tantrums, paid my modest fines, and focused on helping my neighbors when I could. I thought maybe, just maybe, Karen would find a new target. But Karen wasn't wired that way. She thrived on control. The HOA board meetings were her stage. She'd stand there in front of 20 residents, waving her stack of papers like a queen delivering royal decrees. "We must maintain standards," she'd say. "We are the face of Willow Creek." One evening, I attended a meeting out of curiosity. The topic, community vehicle compliance. She pointed at a projected photo of my ambulance. "This is what lowers property values," she announced dramatically. I raised my hand. "That's my vehicle, Karen. It's legal under county code for first responders. She smiled, cold, patronizing. Then perhaps, Mr. Bennett, you should relocate to somewhere that doesn't value visual order. The room went silent. That was her way: humiliate, isolate, dominate. But I didn't know then how far she'd go. I didn't know that her obsession with rules would soon collide with real tragedy. It was 3 weeks after that meeting when the big event happened. The HOA was hosting its annual charity barbecue near the community pool. I wasn't planning to go, but my neighbor Linda talked me into it. "Come on, Tom. You never socialize. It'll be good for you." So I went. Families, kids, laughter, it almost felt normal for once. Karen was, of course, front and center, handing out flyers titled New HOA Safety Policies. She wore her bright pink blazer-matching lipstick and a smile so fake it could have been painted on. Around 3:00 p.m., just as the band started playing, a scream cut through the music. I looked over to see a young woman collapse near the buffet table. Panic erupted. People shouted for help. Instinct kicked in. I ran over, knelt beside her. She was maybe 20, pale, gasping for breath. "Call 911, I yelled. Someone did. I started CPR, counting compressions, my training taking over. Minutes felt like hours. Finally, I heard the faint wail of sirens approaching. Relief washed over me. Help was coming. But then the siren stopped. No engine, no flashing lights entering the gate. Just silence. I frowned, looked toward the main road, and saw the ambulance sitting still, red lights spinning uselessly behind the HOA gate. My stomach dropped. Karen's SUV was parked sideways across the entrance, blocking the path. Even from a distance, I could hear her shouting something about unauthorized entry. I sprinted across the lawn, my chest tight with disbelief. "Move the car, Karen," I yelled as I approached. She turned calm as ever. "They didn't sign in. This is private property. It's an ambulance," I shouted. "Someone's dying. Then they can wait until they fill out the proper access form," she snapped. I couldn't believe what I was hearing. Paramedics were honking, trying to reason with her through the window. She stood her ground, muttering about HOA liability. I wanted to rip my hair out. Every second she wasted could mean brain damage or worse. "Karen, if you don't move this car right now, I swear," she cut me off. "You're not in charge here, Mr. Bennett. I am." I'll never forget the look on her face, calm, smug, completely detached from reality, as she held up her clipboard like it was a badge of authority. That was the moment I knew this wasn't just about power anymore. This was delusion, and it was going to cost someone their life. I could hear the paramedics shouting through the open gate intercom, their voices barely audible over the sirens. "We need access now. We've got a patient in cardiac distress." Karen stood there, arms crossed over her bright pink blazer, looking like she was posing for a magazine cover titled Suburban Tyrant Monthly. "I don't care who you are," she snapped into the speaker. "You cannot enter Willow Creek Estates without prior authorization or a resident escort. Those are the rules." The driver leaned out the window. "Lady, this is an emergency response vehicle." Karen's tone didn't waver. "Then call dispatch to request proper HOA clearance." I felt my blood boil. I was 30 feet away, still covered in sweat and dirt from the CPR attempt, watching a 20-year-old girl's life tick away because someone thought her clipboard gave her divine power. I sprinted toward the gate, waving my arms. "Karen, it's me, Tom Bennett. Let them through." She turned to me with that smug, bureaucratic smile. "Mr. Bennett, I suggest you calm down. This behavior is inappropriate for an HOA resident." "Inappropriate," I shouted. "Someone's dying, you lunatic," her lips pursed. "Please don't use offensive language. We're a family community." I swear for a moment I thought I might actually lose it. Behind her, the flashing red lights strobed against the clean white walls of the guardhouse. The paramedics had stepped out, pulling their equipment, defibrillator, oxygen bag, stretcher, trying to haul it all through the narrow pedestrian gate like pack mules. Every minute that passed was another nail in this poor girl's coffin. One of them shouted, "Sir, we need the gate open. We can't carry all this through in time." I turned to Karen. "Move your SUV. Now." She stared at me, her tone dripping venom. "If I make one exception, Mr. Bennett, everyone will expect the same. Rules exist for a reason. You think a rule book outranks a human life?" "Yes," she said simply. I didn't even have words. I whipped out my phone and hit record. "All right, folks," I said, my voice shaking. "This is what happens when your HOA president values her gate code more than someone's heartbeat." Karen tried to shield her face. "You can't record me without consent." "Watch me," I said. "Say hi to the internet, Karen." A few neighbors had gathered, now drawn by the noise. Some stood frozen in disbelief. Others shouted at her to move the car. One elderly man muttered, "She's lost her damn mind." But Karen didn't flinch. She was enjoying it, her moment of absolute control. "Please," I said one last time, "quieter now. There's a young girl over there. She could die. Just open the gate." Her reply was cold as stone. Then maybe her parents should have filled out the emergency access form. That was it. I turned to the paramedics. "Forget it. Bring your gear. We'll carry her out." We ran back toward the barbecue area, where a small crowd had formed around the girl. She was still unconscious, her lips pale, her breathing shallow. I recognized the pattern's severe cardiac arrhythmia, maybe triggered by heat or dehydration. We set up the defibrillator on the grass. Charging to 201 medic called out. Clear. Her body jolted. A faint pulse flickered under her skin, then faded again. We kept going, compressions, oxygen repeat. Sweat poured down my face, the sirens still wailing uselessly in the background. After what felt like forever, we got a rhythm back. Faint but there. "She's responding," the medic said. "Let's get her to the rig," I said. We lifted her carefully onto the stretcher. The medics, exhausted and furious, began the long walk back to the gate. When we reached it, Karen was still standing there, arms crossed, blocking the main lane like some suburban gatekeeper of the underworld. One paramedic shouted, "Move the vehicle or we'll ram it." Karen rolled her eyes. "Threats from public employees. I'll be filing a complaint with your supervisor." That was when my patience snapped. "Karen," I said slowly, "you're about to obstruct a medical rescue. That's a felony." She blinked, finally showing the faintest sign of doubt. I stepped closer, my voice low and shaking. "You open that gate or I swear I'll make sure every cop, lawyer, and judge in this county knows your name." For a second, silence. Then finally she huffed, climbed into her SUV, and reversed about 6 feet. Just enough for the ambulance to squeeze by. The medics loaded the girl in, slamming the doors. I helped push the stretcher, my hands trembling from adrenaline and fury. The moment those red lights sped off into the distance, I exhaled for what felt like the first time in an hour. Karen just stood there, brushing imaginary dust off her sleeve, muttering something about ungrateful residents. I turned my phone camera back on. "You just delayed emergency medical treatment for 15 minutes, I said. "Do you understand that?" Her smile didn't fade. "And yet, Mr. Bennett, she's alive. So perhaps you owe me a thank you for ensuring the situation didn't escalate." That exact line would be played on every news station in the city 2 days later. But in that moment, I didn't even reply. I just stared at her, utterly speechless, as she turned on her heel and walked back toward her house, completely unaware of the storm she'd just summoned on herself. Because about an hour later, as I sat on my porch trying to process it all, my phone started vibrating nonstop. Texts, missed calls, social media alerts. "Dude, is this your video? Tom, you're on Reddit, front page, Fox 9 just called your name." I opened the clip I'd uploaded right after the ambulance left. Nothing fancy, just the raw footage of Karen blocking the gate, shouting, "No authorization, no entry," and me yelling back in disbelief. It had already hit 50,000 views in 2 hours. The comments were exploding. "This woman should be arrested. HOA presidents are the final boss of suburbia. I hope the patient's okay." That last one hit me hardest. I didn't even know the girl's name yet. I'd done my job, but something in my gut said this wasn't over, not by a long shot. Then around midnight, my neighbor Linda came running up to my door, face pale as chalk. "Tom," she gasped. "You won't believe who that girl was." I frowned. "What do you mean, she's Chloe Hammond?" The name took me a second to register. "You mean—" Mayor Hammond's daughter Linda nodded. "She was visiting her friend in the neighborhood. The mayor's already at the hospital. And people are saying, what she swallowed. They're saying the mayor's furious. He saw your video." I just stood there, phone still buzzing in my hand, realizing the full scope of what had just happened. Karen Delmont hadn't just blocked an ambulance. She'd nearly killed the mayor's daughter on camera in broad daylight while quoting HOA policy. And thanks to my footage, the whole world had seen it. I didn't sleep that night. My phone kept pinging with messages from journalists, old coworkers, even strangers thanking me for standing up. I just sat by the window watching the quiet, manicured street outside, knowing it would never look the same again. Because tomorrow morning, Willow Creek Estates was about to become ground zero for the biggest HOA scandal the county had ever seen. By sunrise the next morning, Willow Creek Estates was no longer the picture-perfect neighborhood it used to be. The kind of place where every lawn looked cloned, every mailbox stood in a straight military line, every neighbor waved but never actually talked. No, that morning it felt like the quiet suburbs had cracked open, and all the rot inside was spilling out, because by then, everyone had seen the video. Local news stations replayed it on loop: Karen Delmont, HOA president, blocking an ambulance while a young woman's life hung in the balance. My voice shouting, "Move the car, Karen." Her cold reply, "Rules are rules." The video had over 500,000 views by breakfast. I woke up to reporters outside the gate, cameras pointed toward the same spot where she'd stood the day before. A few neighbors gathered too, some whispering, some cheering. A few, the ones too afraid to cross Karen in the past, just hid behind curtains. I poured my coffee and watched from the porch as Karen strutted toward the front entrance, acting like none of it had happened. Sunglasses, blazer, clipboard, her armor against reality. By the time I walked to the gate to check the chaos, she was already in full performance mode. "Good morning, everyone," she said to the cameras, voice syrupy sweet. "There's been some unfortunate misunderstanding. I deeply respect our emergency responders." And a reporter cut her off. "Miss Delmont, did you or did you not block an ambulance from entering your neighborhood yesterday?" Karen blinked, then gave the kind of smile people give when they're caught lying but think charm will save them. "I was ensuring compliance with community safety protocols. Unauthorized vehicles are not permitted to enter without clearance. It's in our bylaws." Another reporter shouted, "The patient was the mayor's daughter." Karen's jaw twitched. "I wasn't aware of that at the time. I couldn't help it." I laughed. Out loud, the sound turned every camera my way. Karen's eyes found me instantly. "Mr. Bennett," she said, tone sharp, "perhaps you'd like to share your version of events." "Oh, gladly," I said, stepping forward. "Here's my version. A girl collapsed. We called 911, and you decided your power trip was more important than her heartbeat." "That sound about right." The reporters swarmed closer. Cameras rolled. Karen's nostrils flared. "Mr. Bennett," she hissed through a smile, "I'll remind you this is private property and filming without HOA consent is prohibited." "Yeah," I said, holding up my phone. "Then sue me." That line ended up being the quote of the day. By noon, the footage had made its way to every outlet in the state. Hashtags exploded: number hoakaren, number ambulance gate, number rules over lives. The mayor's office released a statement confirming that his daughter, Chloe Hammond, was in stable condition and recovering in the ICU. But it didn't stop there. The statement ended with something that sent shockwaves through the neighborhood. The city of Brookhaven is launching an immediate investigation into Willow Creek Estates Homeowners Association for potential obstruction of emergency services. When I read that line on my phone, I nearly spilled my coffee. Karen's reign was collapsing, and she knew it, but instead of admitting fault, she doubled down. That afternoon, she sent a community-wide email subject line, "Clarification regarding recent incident." It was 2 pages long, half excuses, half self-congratulations. She blamed unclear signage, accused the paramedics of hostile behavior, and claimed I'd incited disorder by recording unauthorized footage. Within minutes, replies started flooding the neighborhood group chat. "You almost killed someone, Karen. You're done. You're a disgrace." She fired back. "Defamation is a serious offense." I leaned back in my chair, watching it unfold like the world's most entertaining courtroom drama. But later that night, things escalated again. At around 9 p.m., there was a pounding on my door. I opened it to find Karen herself standing there, clipboard in hand, face pale with rage. "Mr. Bennett," she said, her voice trembling between fury and desperation, "you need to take that video down immediately." I crossed my arms. "Why? It's the truth. You don't understand the damage you're causing," she shouted. "People are calling me names, harassing my family. My husband had to take down our Facebook page." I tilted my head. "Sounds like a reputation crisis, not my problem." Her jaw clenched. "I will sue you for defamation and invasion of privacy." I laughed. "Good luck. Everything's time-stamped in public. You did this to yourself." Then she stepped closer, pointing a trembling finger at my chest. "You think you're some kind of hero, don't you? You think saving one person makes you untouchable." "No," I said quietly. "I think saving one person matters more than your HOA handbook." Her eyes glistened with tears she refused to shed. For a moment, I almost pitied her. But then she muttered, "You'll regret this," and stormed off into the dark heels, clacking like a metronome, counting down her own downfall. The next morning, police cruisers rolled into Willow Creek. The county sheriff's office had received 14 complaints about HOA misconduct, all triggered by Karen's behavior. They requested to review gate security footage and visitor logs. Karen tried to block them, of course. "You can't enter without HOA permission." The deputy, a big man with a Stetson and no patience, just stared at her. "Ma'am, the HOA doesn't outrank a warrant." That was the first time I saw genuine fear on her face. They confiscated her laptop, her HOA, email archives, even her SUV's dash cam. By noon, half the neighborhood had gathered around to watch. Karen kept muttering to herself about procedural overreach and civil liberties, but no one cared anymore. The spell was broken. Meanwhile, my phone wouldn't stop ringing. News channels wanted interviews. The mayor's office wanted a statement. Even my old paramedic buddies texted, "Tom, you finally found a way to make the news without saving anyone." I agreed to one interview, just one. I told the reporter, "This isn't about me. It's about what happens when power goes unchecked. No rule should ever come before basic humanity." That line hit home. It played on every local broadcast that night. And suddenly the story wasn't just about Karen anymore, it was about every neighborhood like ours, every small pocket of control where people like her thrived under the guise of community standards. By day 3, Karen's kingdom had collapsed entirely. The HOA board called an emergency meeting at the clubhouse. I showed up not because I wanted to, but because I had to see it end. When I walked in, the atmosphere was electric. Residents filled every seat. Karen sat at the head table, pale and shaking, clutching her clipboard like a shield. "Let's come to order," she said weakly. But before she could speak, Mrs. Ramirez from down the block stood up. "You're not calling anything to order, Karen. You're done." Applause erupted. One by one, people took the mic listing every petty injustice she'd inflicted: fines for children's bikes, threats over Christmas lights, intimidation emails, lies about finances. I watched her crumble in real time, her perfect posture folding inward like a collapsing tent. When my turn came, I didn't raise my voice. I just played the final card, a flash drive with video proof of everything: the ambulance incident, her refusal, her words. The footage played on the projector, echoing through the silent room. No authorization, no entry. Her voice, her arrogance, her downfall, all replayed in high definition. When it ended, I looked her in the eye. "You almost cost a young woman her life because you thought your power mattered more than people. I hope someday you realize how wrong you were." For once, she didn't speak. When the vote came, it was unanimous. Karen Delmont removed from the HOA presidency, indefinitely banned from board activities pending investigation. She stood up slowly, muttered something about witch hunts, and walked out. I watched her leave, realizing that for the first time since I'd moved here, Willow Creek actually felt peaceful. But the peace wouldn't last long, because Karen's story wasn't finished yet, and the mayor's next move would turn this neighborhood scandal into a county-wide reckoning. That night, Willow Creek Estates didn't sleep. You could feel the tension humming in the air like static before a lightning storm. People peered out of their windows. Phones glowed behind curtains. Every front porch light seemed to burn a little brighter, as if the neighborhood was waiting, watching to see what would happen next. And by dawn it did. At precisely 7:42 a.m., 3 black SUVs pulled up to the front gate. Their engines idled for a moment before the lead car rolled forward, sirens flashing blue. The city seal on the doors glinted under the morning Sunday, the mayor's official motorcade. I was sipping my second cup of coffee when the sound reached me, low, official, and heavy with intent. My neighbor Linda came running across the street, barefoot hair still in curlers. "Tom, the mayor's here. He's at the gate with news crews." I put down my mug and muttered, "Well, guess it's time for Karen's encore performance." When I reached the gate, a crowd had already gathered: residents, reporters, even a few police officers. Karen was standing there, of course, hair sprayed stiff as ever, sunglasses on, lips pursed. She looked calm, too calm, like someone who hadn't realized she was already standing in quicksand. The mayor stepped out of his SUV, flanked by 2 aides and a small army of cameras. His face was hard, composed, but you could see the exhaustion around his eyes. He wasn't here for a photo op. "Where is she?" he asked, scanning the crowd. Karen stepped forward, voice steady but brittle. "Good morning, Mayor Hammond." "I save it," he said sharply. "You know exactly why I'm here." The cameras clicked like gunfire. "I'm deeply sorry about the misunderstanding yesterday," Karen began, hands clasped in front of her. "I was merely enforcing community safety protocols." The mayor cut her off. "You blocked emergency medical personnel from reaching my daughter." His voice carried like thunder. The entire street went silent. Karen's mask slipped. I didn't know who she was. I was following the HOA bylaws. The bylaws, the mayor snapped. "You think your HOA rulebook outranks human life. You think property codes matter more than the law." She opened her mouth, but he wasn't finished. "My daughter could have died in that extra 15 minutes you cost her. Do you understand that?" Every camera zoomed in. Karen's lips trembled. "With all due respect, Mr. Mayor, the paramedics didn't follow the proper entry procedure. That did it." The crowd erupted. Shouts came from every direction. "Unbelievable. She's doubling down. Arrest her already." The mayor held up a hand, silencing everyone. "Miss Delmont, the city attorney, is reviewing the footage. Until further notice, you are under investigation for obstruction of emergency services." Karen's face drained of color. You can't do that. I was just doing my job." "Your job," he said coldly, "was to protect your community. Instead, you endangered it." Then, to my surprise, he turned toward me. Mr. Bennett, he said, voice softer, now I saw your video. You did everything right. You kept calm, you documented everything, and because of you, my daughter's alive. I can't thank you enough. I nodded. I just did what any medic would do, sir. He looked me in the eye. No, you did what a good man would do. For a moment, the chaos around us faded. And then the reporters swarmed again, microphones thrust toward me, cameras flashing, questions overlapping. Tom, how long have you lived here? Did you know it was the mayor's daughter at the time? What do you think of the HOA's response? Karen stood frozen, cornered by the same cameras that had once adored her at charity events. Her lips kept moving, but the microphones weren't on her anymore. The story had shifted. By noon, the footage of the confrontation went viral again, this time with the headline, Mayor Confronts HOA President Who Blocked Ambulance, You Could Have Killed My Daughter. It was everywhere. CNN, Reddit, TikTok edits with dramatic music. Even late-night comedians picked it up. One host joked, some HOAs keep lawns in line, this one nearly kept an ambulance out. Karen had become a meme. By that afternoon, she deleted all her social media accounts. The HOA board issued a temporary suspension of her duties, which was just a polite way of saying she was finished. But the damage was done not just to her, but to the entire neighborhood. Property values were plummeting, the HOA's insurance company froze their liability coverage, and residents were furious. That evening, the board called another emergency meeting at the community hall. I didn't plan to attend. I figured I'd already done enough. But curiosity and maybe a little justice pulled me in. The room was packed. Reporters weren't allowed this time, but that didn't stop people from recording on their phones. Karen sat at the end of the long oak table, hair frizzed, mascara smudged, her clipboard missing for the first time since I'd known her. The vice president, a quiet man named Howard, opened the meeting. We've all seen what happened. It's time we discuss next steps. Karen shot up from her seat. Next steps, I am the HOA. You can't just remove me because of one misunderstanding. Misunderstanding, Howard said, his voice shaking. You obstructed an ambulance. You endangered a life. You embarrassed this entire community. Murmurs of agreement filled the room. Someone shouted, you fined me for planting tulips, Karen. Another yelled, you threatened to tow my car for being 10 inches over the curb. Karen banged the table. Those are rules. That's what keeps this neighborhood civilized. I stood from the back of the room. No, Karen. Compassion is what keeps it civilized. Her head whipped toward me. You, she spat. This is your fault. You're the one who filmed me. I didn't make you do it, I said calmly. You did that all by yourself. Her breathing quickened. You think you're a hero. You've destroyed my reputation, Karen, I said quietly. You destroyed it the moment you put your ego above someone's life. For a long moment, no one spoke. Then Howard cleared his throat. All those in favor of removing Miss Delmont from office, raise your hand. Every single hand went up. Karen looked around, eyes wide, mouth trembling. You can't. This is illegal. I'll sue all of you. But the vote was final. She was finished. As people filed out, I stayed behind to help clean up the mess, folding chairs, spilled coffee, stray papers. When I looked back, Karen was still sitting there alone, staring at the empty room. For a brief second, I almost felt sorry for her. Then she muttered under her breath, "This isn't over." And I realized she wasn't the type to go quietly. Sure enough, 2 days later, she sent an email blast to every resident claiming she was unlawfully removed and threatening legal action. She even attached a 12-page document titled A Citizen's Defense Against Tyranny. It was absurd and sad. But while she ranted in her inbox, the rest of us moved on. The mayor's office officially filed a complaint with the county, and a joint investigation between the city attorney and the sheriff's department was announced. A week later, 2 unmarked police cars rolled into Willow Creek. Officers entered Karen's house, and an hour later she was escorted out in handcuffs, charged with obstruction, falsification of HOA records, and misuse of funds. I didn't celebrate. I just watched from my porch as they placed her into the back of the cruiser. Her eyes met mine through the window, full of disbelief, like she still couldn't understand how the world had turned against her. But it wasn't the world, really. It was just the truth catching up. And as the cars drove off, I looked around the quiet, sunlit neighborhood that had once been her kingdom. For the first time, Willow Creek felt like it actually belonged to the people who lived in it. For the next 2 weeks, Willow Creek Estates transformed from a quiet, gated community into something that looked like a small-town crime scene. News vans lined the main boulevard. Reporters camped outside the clubhouse. Every morning, residents stepped outside with their coffee to find police cruisers idling by the fountain and city officials combing through HOA records and folding chairs on the lawn. It was surreal. The same neighborhood that once fined people for improper garden decor now had evidence markers and forensic accountants walking around with clipboards. And in the center of it all was Karen Delmont, or, more accurately, the wreckage she'd left behind. I'd thought after her arrest that things might finally quiet down. But I underestimated the depth of what Karen had built and hidden. It started when the county investigators subpoenaed the HOA's bank statements. Within 48 hours, they found irregularities. Fancy word for theft. Tens of thousands of dollars in maintenance fees had been funneled into a private account under the name WCE, Security and Beautification Fund. The signature on the checks Karen's. When that news hit, the residents lost their collective minds. The group chat exploded. She used our HOA dues for herself. She said the pool renovations were delayed because of permit issues. I bet she bought that new SUV with our money, and she had. Investigators discovered over $58,000 misused, spent on luxury spa visits, executive meals, and even a family vacation to Aspen labeled as HOA Leadership Conference. The fallout spread fast. Local news ran with it, HOA president under fire for embezzlement amid ambulance controversy. What started as one moral outrage had turned into a full-blown corruption scandal. I didn't celebrate. Not yet. I'd seen enough people unravel under stress to know that when power addicts lose control, they either crumble or lash out. Sure enough, a few days later, I got an envelope in my mailbox. No return address, but I didn't need one. Inside was a single sheet of paper covered in all caps, "You think you've won. But I know your secrets too." I stared at it for a long time, half amused, half wary. The woman was under investigation, and she still had time to send hate mail. I showed it to Deputy Morrison, one of the county officers handling the case. He was a tall man with a patient voice, the kind who'd seen it all. He chuckled when he read it. "She's flailing," he said. "We've dealt with her kind before, control freaks who think rules give them immunity. Once the spotlight's on them, they panic." He wasn't wrong. Over the next few days, every skeleton in Karen's HOA closet came tumbling out. Residents came forward with years of harassment emails, doctored violation letters, and doctored votes at board elections. One guy, a retired accountant named George, even had proof that she'd rigged a landscaping contract to favor her cousin's company. When the investigators called me in to give a statement, I laid everything on the table: emails, letters, timestamps, even the clips I hadn't posted online. They thanked me and hinted that obstruction was just the beginning of her legal trouble. "She's facing 3 charges now," Morrison said. "Obstruction of emergency services, falsification of records, and embezzlement. Each one's serious. She could be looking at years, not months." I didn't feel joy, just a deep, heavy relief. Because it wasn't about revenge anymore. It was about accountability. That weekend, the city held a public forum in the town square. The mayor was there, along with legal representatives, and a small crowd of furious residents, half from Willow Creek, half from neighboring HOAs, suddenly questioning their own leadership. When it was my turn to speak, the microphone felt oddly heavy in my hand. "I moved here for peace," I said, "for quiet, for the kind of neighborhood where people looked out for one another. But instead, we got fear. We got fines. We got someone who thought power meant permission to forget compassion." People nodded. Some clapped. "The problem isn't just Karen," I continued. "It's the system that lets people like her thrive unchecked, unchallenged, and unaccountable. If we don't speak up, we're complicit." Afterward, the mayor approached me again. "Tom, I owe you another thank you. My daughter's alive because you didn't give up." How is she doing?" I asked. "She's recovering," he said. "Still weak, but the doctors say she'll make a full recovery. She asked about you, actually. Said you were the calmest man in the chaos." I smiled. "Comes with the job." He laughed softly, but then his tone turned serious. "We're reforming the city's HOA regulations. Mandatory oversight, public audits, transparency." You lit the fuse, Tom. Thank you. The following week, the trial hearings began. Karen appeared in court looking like a ghost of her former self, hair, tied-back makeup, gone posture wilted. Gone was the imperious HOA queen. In her place stood a trembling woman trying to salvage the last scraps of control. Her lawyer argued that she never intended harm, that she was misunderstood, and that the ambulance blockade was a tragic miscommunication. But the video told the truth. Every time her voice echoed through the courtroom, "No authorization, no entry," you could see the jury flinch. When my turn came to testify, I kept it simple. I described what I saw, what I heard, what I felt. I told them about the 15 minutes that nearly ended a young girl's life, about the arrogance that almost turned a tragedy into a funeral. Karen refused to look at me. After I stepped down, her attorney tried one last desperate tactic. He suggested I had a personal vendetta against the HOA. "Vendetta," I repeated, almost laughing. "No, just a conscience." That line ended up quoted in 3 newspapers. The verdict came fast. Guilty on obstruction, guilty on falsifying records, guilty on embezzlement. The judge sentenced her to 1 year of probation, $8,500 restitution to the community fund and community service. It wasn't prison, but it was enough to strip away the last illusion of power she had. After the sentencing, I ran into her briefly outside the courthouse. She didn't recognize me at first. When she finally did, her expression twisted between anger and shame. "You ruined me," she whispered. I shook my head. "No, Karen, you did that yourself." I just hit record. She turned away without another word, escorted by her lawyer down the courthouse steps. The camera flashes followed her like vultures. By the end of that week, the HOA was officially dissolved, temporarily placed under city administration until a new board could be formed. Residents cheered. Someone even threw a barbecue in celebration this time, without fear of fines for unapproved charcoal usage. I stood off to the side with Linda watching kids splash in the pool that Karen had once called unsanitary. The air felt lighter, freer. Linda nudged me. "You ever think about running for HOA president when they reboot it?" I laughed. "Not a chance." "Why not?" she asked. "You're the only one people trust now." I looked around the laughter, the sunlight, the peace that finally felt genuine. "Because I don't want power," I said. "I just want neighbors." Still, I couldn't help but glance toward Karen's old house. The windows were dark, the mailbox stuffed with letters marked, "Return to Sender." A for sale sign leaned crookedly in the yard. Justice had come. Not the kind that shouts or breaks, but the kind that lingers quietly, reminding everyone that arrogance has an expiration date. And for Willow Creek Estates, that date had finally arrived. When the gavel came down and the courtroom emptied, you'd think that would be the end of it. Karen was gone, the HOA dissolved, and peace finally returned to Willow Creek Estates. But stories like this never fade overnight. They ripple through headlines, through neighborhoods, through the lives of everyone who once bowed to the clipboard queen. And this ripple was about to become a wave. It started small. A local news crew did a "Where Are They Now" segment about the case. The anchor called it a symbol of accountability in suburban America. Within hours, national media picked it up. Then came the interviews, the documentaries, the endless think pieces, HOA Gone Wild, The Tyranny of the Gated Community, and my personal favorite, Karen versus Common Sense. Suddenly, my quiet house became a media landmark. People drove by to take photos of the infamous ambulance gate. Someone even left a bouquet of flowers with a note that read, "For Chloe," and for the man who stood up. It was strange being labeled a hero for doing what any decent person should do. I didn't want fame. I just wanted decency to mean something again. But for all the attention, there was still a haunting silence from one person, Karen. After the trial, she vanished. Her husband filed for divorce, her Escalade was repossessed, and her once flawless lawn turned into a patch of wild weeds. Every now and then, people whispered about seeing her around town buying groceries with coupons, keeping her head down, a ghost of the woman who once ruled over us like a self-crowned monarch. Then one morning, about a month after the sentencing, I received an unexpected visitor. It was the mayor. He pulled up in a black sedan, no motorcade this time, just him and his daughter Chloe. She looked much healthier color back in her face, a soft smile, replacing the hospital pallor I remembered. "Morning, Tom," the mayor said, shaking my hand. "Thought we'd drop by," Chloe insisted. "Mr. Bennett," she said, voice quiet but clear. "I never got to thank you properly." She handed me a small envelope. Inside was a handwritten letter, elegant, careful penmanship. It read, "You saved my life, not just medically, but by showing me that courage doesn't always wear a uniform or a badge. Sometimes it just stands up to arrogance." I'll never forget it. I felt my throat tighten. "You didn't have to do that," I said softly. She smiled. "You didn't have to either, but you did." The mayor looked out toward the gate. The city's finally approved a full overhaul of HOA regulations. Mandatory training for board members, financial audits, emergency access protocols. "What happened here won't happen again." "Good," I said, "because no one should have to fight through bureaucracy to save a life." He nodded, eyes narrowing thoughtfully. "We're also renaming this street." That caught me off guard. Renaming it. He smiled faintly. "Bennett Way." The residents already voted. It's not every day someone changes the course of an entire town's laws. I didn't know what to say. I just shook his hand and thanked him. After they left, I sat on the porch for a long time, watching the quiet road that once felt like a battlefield. The same asphalt that had reflected ambulance lights now shimmered peacefully under the afternoon Sunday. But peace, I've learned, doesn't come without scars. A few weeks later, the new HOA elections took place. Not the power-hungry, fear-driven kind like before. This one was simple, fair, almost humble. Residents voted for Patricia Chen, the assistant treasurer who'd blown the whistle on Karen's financial lies. A quiet woman, sharp-minded, respected by everyone. When she gave her acceptance speech, she didn't quote bylaws or talk about aesthetic standards. She said, "From now on, this community runs on empathy, first paperwork, second." The applause that followed wasn't polite, it was genuine, cathartic, human. Still, part of me couldn't help wondering if Karen was somewhere watching it all unfold, seething, rationalizing, convincing herself she'd been the victim. People like her rarely admit fault. They rewrite history in their heads until they're the hero again. And I was right. Because 3 months later I got another letter. No envelope this time, just a piece of paper slipped under my door. The handwriting was shaky but unmistakable. "You destroyed my life, but you also freed me. I see that now. I was obsessed with control because it made me feel safe. Maybe that's my punishment to realize it too late. Don't think of me as a monster, Tom. Just someone who forgot what compassion looked like." There was no signature, but it didn't need one. I never saw her again after that. Rumor had it she moved in with her sister upstate, started volunteering at a community center. Maybe it was redemption. Maybe it was just survival. But either way, she was gone, and with her the shadow that had hung over our neighborhood. The weeks rolled on. The grass grew wild for the first time without fines. Kids rode their bikes down the sidewalks freely. People laughed louder, waved longer, helped each other repaint mailboxes instead of reporting them. I found myself smiling more too. For years, I'd thought peace was something you escaped to find. But now I realized it's something you build with patience, with decency, with people who finally remember how to care. One evening, as the sun dipped low, I stood by that same gate where it all began. The metal had been repainted since the incident, the dents from Karen's SUV finally buffed out. But I could still see it, the flashing lights, the chaos, the stubborn woman standing like a brick wall against mercy. And I could hear my own voice echoing from that day. "You think a rule book outranks a human life?" I smiled to myself. "Not anymore. Not here." As I turned to head home, I noticed a small bronze plaque newly installed beside the gate. I knelt to read it. "In honor of those who choose compassion over control and courage over compliance." Below it, in smaller letters, "Dedicated to Paramedic Tom Bennett for reminding us what humanity means." For a long moment, I couldn't move. The memory of sirens, shouting, and panic all faded into quiet gratitude. Linda walked up behind me, hands on her hips. "You gonna cry, hero?" she teased. I laughed, blinking back the sting in my eyes. "Maybe a little." She smiled. "You earned it." That night, for the first time since I moved to Willow Creek, I slept soundly. No patrols, no violation letters, no fear of power hiding behind a signature. Just the soft, steady heartbeat of a neighborhood finally breathing again. Karen's chapter had closed, but her story had changed all of us. And as strange as it sounds, part of me was grateful to her. Because without her madness, we'd never have found our humanity. The irony still made me chuckle sometimes. The woman who blocked an ambulance ended up saving a community. Life has a sense of humor that way. Months passed. The chaos that once defined Willow Creek Estates had settled into something unfamiliar but welcome quiet. Not the tense, rule-enforced quiet that Karen used to demand, but the kind that comes from peace of mind, the sound of kids playing dogs, barking neighbors, chatting instead of tattling. The old HOA office, once Karen's personal throne room, had been converted into a community space. The no trespassing sign was replaced with a small wooden plaque that read "Welcome Neighbors." Inside, the air smelled faintly of coffee and fresh paint. A bookshelf lined one wall filled with neighborhood journals and shared gardening tips. Patricia Chen, now the officially elected president, ran meetings that lasted 20 minutes instead of 3 hours. And me, I went back to being what I'd always wanted to be, a quiet man with a porch, a coffee mug, and a good conscience. But sometimes, when the sun hit the gate just right, I could still see flashes of red light reflecting off the metal ghosts of that day burned into memory. Then one evening, Patricia called me. "Tom," she said, "you should come by the clubhouse. We're holding something special tonight." I wasn't in the mood for another meeting, but she sounded too sincere to refuse. When I arrived, the place was full neighbors I'd known for years, but had barely spoken to, families, laughing kids running between chairs. On the table was a large cake that read, "To New Beginnings." In the center of the room stood a framed photograph, Chloe Hammond, smiling, healthy, standing beside the mayor at a charity event for emergency services. Patricia tapped the microphone. "Everyone," she began, "I just wanted to remind us how far we've come. Not long ago, we were afraid to speak up, afraid of letters of fines of each other. But thanks to one man's courage, we found our voice again." She gestured toward me. I immediately shook my head. No, this wasn't about me, but the room disagreed. Applause erupted, warm and thunderous. Linda shouted from the back, "Come on, hero, take the credit for once," I laughed, embarrassed. "All right," I said, taking the mic. "But just for a minute." I looked around the room, faces that used to glance away in fear, now smiling openly, genuinely. I moved here thinking peace was about rules, about order. But it turns out peace isn't something you enforce, it's something you share. I watched this community almost destroy itself because one person thought authority meant superiority. But what saved us wasn't punishment, it was accountability, and each of you choosing to stand up when it mattered. People nodded. Patricia wiped away a tear. "We've all been through a lot," I continued. "But I've learned something important: when people forget compassion, communities die. And when one person speaks up, it reminds everyone else that silence isn't safety, it's surrender. So thank you, not for praising me, but for proving that good neighbors still exist." The crowd clapped again. It wasn't the kind of applause you hear at a speech, it was the kind that says we've all been there and we made it through. Afterward, Chloe came up to me. Yes, she was there too, wearing a navy dress and holding a bouquet of sunflowers. She said, smiling shyly, "I still can't believe all this started because one woman didn't want to open a gate." "Power and pride," I said. "A deadly mix." She nodded. "Well, at least it ended with purpose." Later that night, after everyone left, I walked outside and sat by the gate again. The new security guard nodded politely and waved me through. The gate now had an emergency override system, a bright red button labeled "Emergency Access Authorized 24/7." I smiled to myself. That's how it should have been from the start. The air was crisp, the sky a deep blue-black. Fireflies flickered in the distance, tiny reminders that light always finds its way through darkness. As I sat there, I thought about Karen again. I hadn't heard from her since that strange letter months ago. Maybe she was still trying to make sense of her downfall. Maybe she'd finally found humility somewhere out there. But part of me hoped she'd learned something: that control isn't leadership and fear isn't respect. I also thought about the mayor and his daughter. Chloe had since launched a foundation called Open Gates, dedicated to improving emergency access in private communities. They'd even invited me to speak at the launch. I told her I wasn't much for speeches, but she said, "You don't have to perform, Tom. Just tell the truth." That's what saved me the first time. And maybe she was right. A few weeks later, I did stand on that stage, microphone in hand, heart pounding harder than it ever had during a medical call. The audience was full of city officials, first responders, and regular folks. I told them what I saw that day: the flashing lights, the stubbornness, the arrogance that almost killed an innocent person. But I also told them what came after: the unity, the change, the compassion. Sometimes I said the most dangerous thing in the world isn't malice, it's pride disguised as order. When rules matter more than people, you've already lost the point of having them. The crowd stood and clapped. The mayor even shook my hand again. But what mattered most was Chloe's smile and the front row eyes shining with gratitude. By the time I got home that night, I felt something I hadn't felt in years: peace without guilt. It's funny, isn't it? How one act of cruelty can set off a chain of kindness. How one person's arrogance can awaken everyone else's courage. Karen's name faded from the headlines eventually. Willow Creek recovered. But every once in a while, when a new neighbor moves in and asks about that gate story, I just chuckle and say, "We learned our lesson." Because we did. We learned that rules should protect people, not control them. We learned that one voice can break the silence of an entire system. And we learned that real communities aren't built on fear, they're built on empathy, shared humanity, and the courage to do what's right when it's hardest. I glance now at the new street sign, Bennett Way. It still feels strange seeing my name there. But maybe it's not just my name, it's a reminder of what one stubborn medic and one cruel mistake taught a whole town. As the wind rustled through the trees, I whispered the truth to myself, a small prayer disguised as a lesson. Power fades, pride fails, but kindness echoes forever. No community, no matter how perfect it looks, is immune to corruption when empathy dies. Rules are only as moral as the people who enforce them. It's easy to follow the book. It's harder to follow your heart when it costs you comfort or reputation. When you see injustice, whether it's a bully with a badge, a neighbor with a clipboard, or an HOA president with too much power, don't stay silent. One act of courage, even a small one, can change everything. So ask yourself, what kind of neighbor do you want to be? The one who enforces fear, or the one who opens the gate? If you've ever faced something like this, share your story in the comments below. I read every one of them. And if you believe compassion should always win over control, hit that subscribe button and join our community of real-life HOA survivors. Because as we've learned here in Willow Creek, sometimes doing the right thing isn't about breaking the rules. It's about rewriting them.